Get out of this seat. First class is not for people like you. The words did not stumble. They landed sharp, deliberate, and loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. A ripple of silence followed, the kind that cuts deeper than noise. In row 2 amperes, Marcus Carter sat still, his boarding pass torn to shreds on the floor, his arms gripped by security as if he were a trespasser rather than a passenger who had paid for this very seat. The insult hung in the recycled air of the aircraft, heavy, choking, undeniable. Passengers turned their heads. Some whispered in disbelief. Others raised their phones, recording what was quickly becoming a spectacle. The man at the center of it all, a black man in a plain white shirt, no jewelry, no entourage, did not rise to anger. He did not protest. He simply sat anchored, as if welded to the cabin floor. Calm, unflinching, his silence screamed louder than the voices accusing him. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we are glad you are here. Now, back to Marcus Carter. The humiliation had begun the moment he stepped on board. Nicole, the senior flight attendant, looked him up and down with a smirk that spoke louder than her words. "Sir, you are in the wrong cabin," she said flatly. He showed her his ticket, first class, seat 2 amperes. She did not even glance at the barcode. She took the paper between her manicured fingers and ripped it straight down the middle. The sound echoed through the plush cabin like a verdict. "This is fake. Nice try." Behind her, a couple dressed in tailored suits sipped champagne and waited impatiently, as though the seat had been promised to them all along. The captain appeared, summoned by whispers of fraud. He looked at Marcus once, then at the couple, and nodded as though the decision had already been made. "You will need to leave this seat. We have priority guests," he said, his tone final, his eyes cold. Marcus did not budge. His ID was valid. His boarding pass had scanned green. But none of it mattered. Not here. Not when skin and simplicity outweighed fact. The officers arrived, heavy boots thudding on the carpet, uniforms crisp with authority. One grabbed Marcus's left arm, the other his right, a show of force designed for the cameras now glowing red across the cabin. "You are being detained for fraud," the officer announced. Then came the dagger. "You do not belong in first class. You never will." The words triggered a low chorus of gasps. A woman in row 3 pressed her hand to her mouth. A man near the aisle muttered, "This is wrong." A young trainee attendant at the back whispered to herself, "His ticket was real. I saw it." But her truth was swallowed whole by the louder voices in power. The air inside the aircraft was charged, tense, alive with injustice. Marcus Carter, billionaire CEO, part owner of the airline itself, sat unmoving. His silence was not submission. It was a decision. A storm was forming, and he had chosen to let the first lightning strike hit without lifting a hand. What they did not know was that the man they were dragging out was not just a passenger. He was the reckoning they had invited onto their flight. And in less than 25 minutes, this cabin, this crew, and this airline would be thrown into chaos. Marcus Carter did not look like the picture of wealth that most of the cabin expected. There was no tailored suit, no gold watch, no entourage trailing behind him. Just a white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled once, and quiet eyes that had seen this play unfold before. He carried a slim leather case and nothing else. To most, he looked like an ordinary man who had wandered into the wrong part of the plane. That was exactly how he wanted it. He had chosen this flight on purpose. For months, reviews had poured in about how Horizon Airlines staff judged passengers not by their tickets, but by their appearance. He had read the complaints, heard the stories, and decided that this time he would see it with his own eyes. So he dressed simply, no signs of wealth, no hints of power, only a valid boarding pass to seat 2 amperes. When he stepped onto the aircraft, the air had been calm. The first-class cabin glowed softly, leather seats aligned like a promise of peace. For a moment, it seemed routine. He walked down the aisle quietly, slid into his seat, and rested his case at his feet. But peace did not last long. Nicole, the senior flight attendant, spotted him almost immediately. She did not see the name on his pass. She saw his skin, his clothes, his lack of display. To her, he was already wrong. From the corner of the cabin, 2 other attendants exchanged glances. their smirks thin but visible. One muttered, "He looks more like economy." They thought their voices were low. They were not. Marcus heard every word, but he did not react. Then the pressure mounted. A wealthy couple entered, their presence loud with tailored fashion and clinking glasses. They looked at Marcus as if he were sitting in their living room chair. The captain greeted them warmly, then turned to Marcus with suspicion. "This seat is for priority travelers," he said. The words were not an explanation. They were a judgment. The young trainee, Mia, hovered in the background. She had seen the scan light up green when Marcus boarded. She had seen the system confirm his ticket. Her lips parted as if to speak, but Nicole's glare silenced her before a single word could form. Mia looked down, ashamed, but her hands trembled as she pressed record on her phone's audio app, a quiet act of defiance. Marcus sat back, still calm, still silent. He had faced this kind of gaze before at 25 in a hotel lobby, at 32 in a bank office, now again at 48 in the sky. He knew the script. He also knew how it ended. The first-class cabin was no longer just a place of luxury. It had become a stage. Every eye, every whisper, every phone lens turned toward one man who had done nothing more than take the seat he had rightfully paid for. And in the silence between accusations, Marcus Carter was already deciding how the next act would play out. The tension in the cabin rose with every passing second. Nicole stood tall at the aisle, her pink blazer catching the soft overhead lights, her voice cutting sharp through the murmurs. "Sir, you will need to move. This is not your seat." She gestured toward the economy cabin without even looking at the crumpled remnants of the boarding pass she had already torn. Marcus did not answer. He sat with his back straight, his hands folded calmly in his lap. His silence made her louder. "Security is on the way," she added, as if that alone proved her right. Across the aisle, Richard and Laura Bennett, the wealthy couple dressed in silk and pressed linen, exchanged a knowing glance. They had flown this airline dozens of times. Their smiles suggested privilege dressed as confidence. Laura leaned in, her voice carrying just far enough. "We were told this seat would be ours. I do not understand why he is still here." Nicole nodded at them without hesitation. "Do not worry. It will be handled." Then she turned back to Marcus. "You are wasting everyone's time." The passengers nearby felt the shift. Some frowned, others whispered, and a few phones tilted higher to record what was happening. In row 3, a woman muttered, "This looks wrong. He has not done anything." Her seatmate raised his phone as well, the red recording light glowing like a quiet alarm. Then the captain arrived. His uniform was pressed, his face stern with authority. He looked first at the Bennetts, offering a polite nod, then down at Marcus, as if delivering judgment. "This seat has been reassigned," he declared. "You will need to vacate immediately." Marcus lifted his gaze, steady and unwavering. "My ticket says otherwise," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. The captain's lips tightened. "We have important guests. We cannot allow disruption. Move or you will be escorted off." Mia, the trainee attendant, felt her chest tighten. She had seen the truth. She had seen his ticket scan green. The unfairness burned inside her, but the fear of Nicole's glare held her in place. Quietly, she tapped her phone screen, saving another recording. The cabin felt smaller now, the air heavier. Every word spoken by staff was another nail hammered into injustice. Passengers shifted in their seats, torn between discomfort and curiosity. Some shook their heads, others whispered louder, the hum of disbelief building. Marcus remained unmoved. He had lived this before in boardrooms, in banks, in hotels. The difference now was that he was not just a target. He was the storm they had chosen to provoke. He leaned back slightly, his voice low but carrying. "If you are certain this is the decision you want to make, then make it. But understand this, you will regret it." The captain stiffened, misreading his calm as arrogance. Nicole smirked, convinced victory was near. But the passengers who watched, the ones recording, the ones whispering, they saw something different. They saw a man who had not raised his voice once, and yet already commanded the room. The stage was set. The injustice had been declared. What no one realized was that every second of silence from Marcus Carter was not surrender. It was strategy. And the moment to reveal his hand was approaching fast. The security officers arrived with the kind of presence meant to intimidate. Their shoes struck the carpeted aisle with heavy steps, and their hands already hovered near Marcus Carter's shoulders as though he were a criminal waiting to be escorted out. One of them, tall and square-shouldered, leaned down and spoke just above a whisper, yet loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Stand up now, or we will remove you." Marcus did not flinch. He had heard those same words in different forms for decades. At 25, it had been a hotel clerk telling him, "This lobby is not for loitering." At 32, it had been a banker declaring, "Your application is too risky. You do not belong in this market." And now, at 48, it was an airline crew insisting, "First class is not for people like you." The language had changed, but the meaning was the same. Nicole crossed her arms, her smirk sharpening as the officers loomed over him. "Sir, your refusal only proves what we already know. This seat is not yours." Her words dripped with the kind of certainty born not from truth, but from prejudice. From the back of the cabin, a man in his 30s raised his phone higher. "He showed his ticket," the man said, his voice carrying. "I saw it. Why are you treating him like a threat?" "Mind your business," Nicole snapped, her voice rising. "This is airline protocol." But protocol was not what the passengers saw. They saw a man who had not raised his voice once, sitting still while humiliation gathered like storm clouds above him. They saw security treating calm dignity as defiance. And slowly, the murmur of discomfort spread row by row. Mia, the trainee attendant, clenched her fists behind her back. She had watched Nicole tear the boarding pass. She had seen the scan turn green. The truth weighed on her tongue like a stone she was not yet brave enough to drop. Her phone recorded again from inside her pocket, capturing every word. Marcus lifted his head, his gaze steady. "Run my name," he said evenly. The command was simple, but it carried force. Nicole shook her head, dismissive. "You are not verified. This is not a walk-in service. We do not have time for your games." The taller security officer pressed forward, his hand closing around Marcus's arm. The cabin gasped as if one body. A woman in row 4 whispered, "This is discrimination." Her companion nodded, adding, "They would never treat someone else this way." Marcus remained seated. His voice did not rise, but the steel inside it cut clean. "Touch me again and you will answer for it." For a moment, the aisle froze. The officer hesitated, his grip loosening under the weight of Marcus's tone. Nicole rolled her eyes and waved him on, but doubt flickered in his expression. The air was electric now. Phones were raised higher, passengers leaning forward, the truth no longer invisible. Marcus had not fought, he had not shouted, but with a single sentence, he had shifted the power. His silence was no longer seen as weakness. It was a storm waiting for release, and everyone in that cabin could feel it pressing closer. The cabin had become a stage, and the audience was no longer silent. Every passenger could feel that something had gone wrong. The whispering swelled, filling the air with uneasy questions. Phones tilted higher, their small red lights glowing like watchful eyes. What had started as a quiet boarding had turned into a public trial. In row 6, a woman in her 40s leaned toward her husband. "This is not right," she whispered. That man showed his ticket. Her husband nodded, eyes fixed on Marcus as though he were the only steady point in a storm. Near the rear of the first-class section, a younger man pressed record on his phone. His voice was steady but angry. "We are watching Horizon Airlines treat a black man like a criminal for sitting in the seat he paid for. Everyone needs to see this." His words carried through the cabin, sharp enough that even Nicole stiffened. Mia, the trainee attendant, felt her heart pounding. Her phone in her jacket pocket was already recording everything, but her conscience screamed louder than her fear. She stepped forward hesitantly, her voice quiet at first. "His ticket scanned green. I saw it." Nicole spun around instantly, her glare sharp enough to cut. "Stay out of this, Mia. This is above your level." Her tone was laced with both scorn and warning, reminding the young woman of her place. But the words had already escaped. Several passengers turned toward Mia, their eyes widening. One man muttered, "She saw it? Then why is this happening?" The tension grew heavier. Marcus remained motionless, but his calm presence began to feel like resistance. Every insult, every order thrown his way only made his silence louder. He was not just a man in a seat anymore. He was a mirror showing the passengers exactly what kind of injustice was unfolding before them. One passenger, a woman in business attire, raised her voice. If his ticket was valid, then this is discrimination. Plain and simple. She was not shouting, but the conviction in her tone rippled through the rows. Nicole's smile faltered for the first time. She waved her hand dismissively. "Ma'am, You do not know what you are talking about. This is procedure." But the passengers no longer looked convinced. They had heard too much, seen too much. The claim of procedure rang hollow against the sight of a man calm and silent being dragged toward humiliation. Marcus finally spoke, his words low but clear. "The problem is not the ticket. The problem is that you decided who I was before you even looked at it." The silence after his words was heavier than any shout. For the first time, Nicole's smirk cracked. The captain shifted uncomfortably, his authority beginning to unravel, and in that moment, the passengers realized what Marcus had known all along. This was not about paperwork or policy. This was about prejudice. And now, with witnesses recording from every angle, there was no hiding from the truth pressing down on the cabin. The confrontation did not cool. It climbed higher, sharper, like pressure inside a sealed cabin with no release valve. Nicole's voice rose above the low hum of passengers. "Security, remove him now. This is final." Her tone was triumphant, as if the louder she became, the more correct she sounded. Richard Bennett, seated just one row away, leaned forward in his tailored suit. "This is taking too long," he muttered, his words soaked in entitlement. His wife Laura gave a thin smile, tilting her glass of champagne. "We should already be in those seats," she said, her voice carrying the tone of ownership rather than suggestion. The captain stood beside them, his uniform stiff, his eyes fixed on Marcus with calculated disdain. "Sir, this disruption cannot continue," he declared, his voice heavy with authority. "Passengers of your type cannot expect to sit in this section without question. Move now." Gasps rippled across the rows. Several passengers exchanged looks, their unease now plain. A man near the aisle whispered, "Did he just say your type?" Another replied, "I heard it too." Phones tilted even higher, catching every angle, every word. Marcus remained still, his expression unchanging. He did not match their volume. He did not feed their theatrics. He simply breathed, his eyes steady on the captain. His silence unsettled them more than shouting ever could. Mia, the young trainee, felt her courage push harder against her fear. She stepped forward again, voice trembling but audible this time. "Captain, I saw his boarding pass. It scanned valid. It was seat 2 amperes. Her words pierced the tension like a crack of thunder. Nicole's face flushed. "Mia, that is enough. Do not speak again unless you want to lose your position." But the damage was already done. Several passengers leaned forward, whispering louder. The trainee confirmed it. They know he belongs here. The narrative of fraud was collapsing in real time. Nicole's response grew harsher. She turned back to Marcus, her tone now biting with frustration. "You are not a real first-class passenger. You do not belong here. Stop pretending." That sentence, that deliberate dismissal, broke the last layer of composure among the crowd. A woman in row 4 stood up, her phone raised high. "We all heard that. You are discriminating against him because of how he looks." Another voice followed quickly from the back. "This is racism, plain and simple. We are not blind." The cabin buzzed with energy, voices layering over each other, indignation rising. The truth had become undeniable. It was no longer just Marcus against the crew. It was Marcus and the passengers who dared to speak against injustice. Through it all, Marcus Carter did not rise from his seat. He did not need to. His very calmness had become an indictment of everything unraveling around him. The louder they tried to erase him, the more visible the prejudice became. And in the eyes of those watching, recording, and whispering, the tide was beginning to turn. The breaking point arrived not with a whisper, but with a command that cracked like a whip. Nicole leaned forward, her voice sharp enough to slice through every conversation in the cabin. "Detain him. He is a fraud. Put him in restraints if you have to." The taller security officer did not hesitate. He gripped Marcus Carter's arm harder, his knuckles pale with force. The second officer reached for Marcus's leather case at his feet, yanking it away as if it were stolen property. The case thudded against the aisle floor, a humiliating display for all to see. Laura Bennett smirked over the rim of her glass. "Finally, this circus is ending." Richard nodded in smug agreement. "Unbelievable, they even let him walk in here." But for the passengers watching, the scene no longer looked like order being restored. It looked like cruelty. The silence that followed was not the silence of relief. It was the silence of shock. Then came the words that would not be forgotten. The taller officer spoke as he pressed down on Marcus's shoulder. You people are always causing problems. First class is not made for you. You never belonged here and you never will. The cabin gasped as one body. Phones shook in hands, now trembling with rage. A man near row 3 stood up halfway, his voice clear and shaking. He just said that out loud. Did everyone hear it? A chorus of yeses followed. Someone further back shouted, "That is racism, pure racism." Marcus sat steady, his body anchored, though the force against him grew harsher. His voice finally broke the charged air. Calm, controlled, dangerous. You have gone too far. The female passenger in row 4, who had already spoken, raised her phone higher. He has not resisted once, not once, and still you treat him like this. Her words were no longer just commentary. They were evidence, recorded and amplified by dozens of screens now broadcasting live to the world. Nicole's face tightened. She turned to the captain. "This has to end now. Call the gate. We are removing him." The captain adjusted his cap and gave a short nod, his voice curt. "Do it! He is not staying on this flight." The murmurs erupted louder. Some passengers shouted back in protest. "He paid for that seat. This is illegal. You cannot just erase someone like this." The buzz was no longer quiet disapproval. It was a swell of defiance. Mia could not stay silent any longer. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "You cannot do this. His name is on the manifest. His seat was confirmed. I saw it." Nicole spun on her, furious. "You are finished, Mia. Do you understand? Finished." But the crowd had already heard the truth. They had already seen the abuse. And with every second that Marcus sat still, his calm dignity turned their shame into evidence. The humiliation had reached its peak. The insult had been carved into the air for everyone to hear, and what none of the crew realized was that this was the moment the power would begin to slip from their hands. The aisle was buzzing with chaos when Marcus Carter finally moved, but not in the way the crew expected. He did not rise to fight. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he reached slowly into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and pressed a single button. The calmness of the gesture made the entire cabin lean in, waiting for what would come next. "Rachel," he said evenly, his tone carrying with precision, "log everything. Every insult, every command. Begin protocol immediately." The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and instant. "Understood, Mr. Carter. Protocol is active. Compliance and legal have been notified. Do you want me to escalate?" Nicole blinked, her smirk faltering for the first time. "Who are you calling? Nobody is coming to save you," she snapped, her confidence cracking as her words reached only half their intended height. Marcus did not even look at her. He spoke clearly into the phone, his voice calm enough to sound like control itself. "Record the language used by security, especially the phrase, 'you people.' Flag it as discriminatory and forward it directly to the boardroom." Passengers gasped again, their phones now not just capturing injustice but witnessing a counterattack. A woman in row 3 whispered to her neighbor, "He sounds like he is in charge of something big." The man beside her nodded. "That is not how regular passengers talk." The taller officer still gripped Marcus's arm, but his hand had begun to loosen. The certainty that fueled his earlier aggression now flickered with doubt. "Sir," he muttered, "cooperate, or we will have no choice." Marcus turned his head slowly toward him, his gaze unshaken. "You already made your choice. Now you will live with the consequences." Rachel's voice came through again, louder this time because Marcus had put the call on speaker. "Compliance has acknowledged receipt of the incident log. They are monitoring live. The board will have this within minutes." Mia's eyes widened. She covered her mouth, then lowered her hands quickly. She understood what was happening but dared not speak it aloud. Nicole, however, bristled with fury. "Turn that phone off now. You are not authorized to record anything on this aircraft." Marcus tilted his head, calm as ever. "I do not need authorization to log my own humiliation, and you do not need to worry about the footage. I prefer facts, not clips." The cabin fell into a strange silence. Even the passengers who had been murmuring grew quiet, their attention locked on Marcus's measured defiance. It was not shouting, it was not rage. It was precision. Every word felt like a thread pulled tight, unraveling the authority the crew thought they held. Nicole's face flushed red as she snapped toward the captain. "This is manipulation. He is playing some stunt." But the passengers were no longer convinced. They saw a man who had endured insult after insult without losing his composure. They saw him counter with quiet power, while the crew shouted and scrambled. And in that moment, more than one passenger began to whisper the same thought. This man is not just another traveler. He is someone bigger, someone they should not have crossed. The moment of revelation began slowly, like the tightening of a drum before the strike. Marcus Carter did not raise his voice. He did not stand with aggression. He simply leaned forward in his seat, his phone still glowing in his hand, and spoke with clarity that silenced the entire first-class cabin. "My name," he said, pausing just long enough for every passenger to lean closer, "is Marcus Carter, Chief Executive Officer of Carter Global Holdings, and I am a major shareholder in Horizon Airlines." The cabin erupted. Gasps rippled through the rows, passengers whispering frantically to one another. A man 2 rows back nearly dropped his phone. "Wait, he owns part of the airline?" A woman beside him whispered. "Not part." He said, "Major shareholder." Nicole froze mid-breath, her mouth half open as if the next insult had died before it could form. The captain blinked, his posture rigid but his eyes wide with sudden unease. The 2 security officers, who only moments before had gripped Marcus like a criminal, now loosened their hold as though his skin burned to the touch. Marcus continued, his voice steady, his words deliberate. "You accused me of fraud in the very cabin my company helped design. You threatened to remove me from a seat I paid for on an airline that my investments keep afloat. You told me I did not belong. The truth is, without people like me, none of you would be here." Phones caught every word. Dozens of screens streamed live as passengers whispered in disbelief, some smiling, others shaking their heads at the sheer audacity of what they had just witnessed. Laura Bennett's glass slipped slightly in her hand, her smug confidence evaporating into pale shock. "He cannot be serious," she muttered, though her voice trembled. Her husband Richard leaned forward, eyes darting between Marcus and the captain. "If he is telling the truth, then we are finished," he whispered hoarsely. Mia, her voice quiet but firm, finally stepped closer. "I knew something was wrong," she said, looking at Nicole. "I told you his ticket was valid." Nicole's face turned a deep shade of red, but no words came. The silence around her was not the silence of power anymore. It was the silence of exposure. Marcus placed his phone on the tray table, its speakers still active. Rachel's voice came through crisp and professional. "Confirmation complete. Carter Global Holdings currently owns 25% of Horizon Airlines. All communications from this cabin are being logged and transmitted to the executive board in real time." The captain's jaw tightened. The weight of every eye in the cabin pressed against him, stripping away the authority of his uniform. He opened his mouth, but Marcus spoke first. "You thought I was nobody. You assumed I was less. That assumption is the last mistake you will ever make in this role." The air inside the cabin shifted. Power had changed hands, and everyone knew it. The crew, who once towered above Marcus, now stood small, cornered by the truth they had unleashed. And for the first time since the boarding began, Marcus Carter leaned back in his seat, no longer the accused, but the judge. The weight of Marcus Carter's revelation crashed through the cabin like a wave. The passengers who had doubted now stared with wide eyes, and those who had suspected something greater sat back in vindication. Every camera remained lifted, every lens locked onto the faces of the crew whose authority had evaporated. Nicole's smirk had vanished completely, her lips pressed tight, her hands fidgeting against her blazer. She tried to speak, but the words tangled and died before leaving her throat. The captain shifted his stance, adjusting his cap, but even that familiar gesture looked hollow under the gravity of truth. The 2 security officers who had gripped Marcus so firmly now stepped back a pace, their eyes darting to one another. The taller one muttered, "Sir, we were just following orders." His voice no longer carried authority, it carried fear. Passengers erupted in murmurs. A woman in row 3 said, "I knew it. That calm, that silence. It was power." Another passenger shook his head in disbelief. They tried to throw out the man who owns part of the airline. Rachel's voice came steady from the phone resting on Marcus's tray. "Board acknowledgement confirmed. Executive oversight is now live. Your instructions will be executed immediately, Mr. Carter." Marcus did not raise his hand to quiet the room. He did not need to. His presence alone was enough to command silence once more. His eyes moved deliberately from Nicole to the captain, to the officers still hovering by his seat. Each of them looked smaller under his gaze, their earlier confidence replaced by panic. "You dragged me through humiliation," Marcus said, his tone level but carrying like thunder across the cabin. You stole my boarding pass. You accused me of fraud. You told me that I did not belong. Now every passenger here has witnessed your mistake, and the board of directors is watching alongside them. Nicole's voice finally broke free, shaky and defensive. We did not know who you were. Marcus's gaze cut through her words like a blade. That is the problem. It should never matter who I am. It should only matter how you chose to treat me when you believed I was no one. A hush fell over the cabin. Passengers nodded, their faces set with recognition. The humiliation had been witnessed. The truth had been recorded. And the guilty could not escape the judgment pressing down from all sides. Richard and Laura Bennett shrank back into their seats, the champagne in Laura's glass left untouched. Their earlier smirks looked grotesque now, painted across faces pale with regret. One passenger pointed at them. And you were ready to take his seat. You knew what was happening. Laura's eyes fell to the floor. The younger attendant, Mia, stood straighter now, her fear replaced by resolve. I saw his name on the manifest. His seat was confirmed. I will testify to that. Marcus gave her a brief nod of acknowledgement. It was not gratitude in words, but recognition in silence. The cabin had shifted. It was no longer Marcus against an airline crew. It was Marcus and a cabin full of witnesses against the arrogance of power abused. The balance had tilted, and everyone could feel it. The cabin trembled with a silence that felt louder than any storm. Marcus Carter did not rush. He leaned forward, his phone resting on the tray, his voice measured and absolute. Rachel, he said, never once looking away from the crew, suspend this team immediately. Effective now. The reply came through the speaker without hesitation. Confirmed, Mr. Carter. Suspension orders logged. Access credentials revoked. Horizon systems will update within 60 seconds. The words spread like fire. Nicole's eyes widened, her mouth opening but no sound escaping. She stumbled back a step, clutching her blazer as if it could shield her from what had just been announced. You cannot do this, she stammered. You do not have the power. Marcus's stare cut through her panic. Power is not granted by your permission. It is exercised by truth, and the truth is already watching. The captain pulled his radio from his belt, pressing the button in desperation. A red light blinked, denying him. He tried again, harder, but the system had locked him out. His authority vanished with a single failed signal. The officers followed quickly, swiping their badges against the panel near the door. Both turned red. Both failed. Gasps echoed across the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, their phones capturing the unraveling of power in real time. He shut them down, one whispered. Their badges do not even work anymore. Nicole's hands trembled as she swiped her own card against the galley reader. Red. She tried again. Red. She tried a third time, frantic now, her breath breaking, until the card slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. Rachel's voice returned, calm and precise. Suspension complete. Documentation transmitted to legal and compliance. The executive board has been notified. Passengers began to murmur openly. He warned them, one man said. They would not listen. Another added, they tried to strip him of dignity, and now he stripped them of authority. Ugh, Nicole's voice broke in desperation. We did not mean, Marcus's reply was cold and final. You meant every word. You meant every action. You thought I was powerless. That mistake is yours. The cabin had shifted completely. Where once authority stood tall in uniforms and badges, now only Marcus Carter remained unshaken, the calm center of justice, while those who mocked him stood, stripped bare before an audience of witnesses. The cabin held a silence that was not peace but reckoning. Every passenger felt it. The crew who had mocked and humiliated now stood stripped of power, their badges useless, their words hollow. Phones remained raised, capturing not only injustice but also its reversal. Marcus Carter sat back in his seat, his posture unshaken, his voice calm yet final. You believed I had to prove my worth to sit here. You were wrong. The question is not who I am. The question is who you revealed yourselves to be. Nicole's shoulders sagged. The captain stared at the floor. The officers, once so quick to tighten their grip, now hovered at the edge of shame. Rachel's voice cut through once more from the phone. Mr. Carter, all suspensions confirmed. The board has received full documentation. Public relations will handle external fallout. Do you have a closing directive? Marcus let the silence stretch before he answered. Yes. Ensure this is not hidden. Let it stand as record. Not because I am Marcus Carter, because no one should be treated this way. A murmur of agreement swept through the cabin. A passenger whispered, "That is the truth." Another nodded. He did not raise his voice once, and still he brought justice. Marcus closed his phone gently and looked ahead. "I do not need a recording. I am the result of what happened here." The cabin seemed to exhale. Justice had been delivered, even at 30,000 feet.